Hey guys, welcome to my channel. This is LaQuinta, also known as Q, and this week I'm going to be starting the series called Escape, based on a story that I'm in the process of writing. So I'll be giving it to you, maybe a chapter here, a chapter there, and I'll throw up the pictures of the characters so you have an idea. I'll be reading the story, so stay tuned. Chapter 1, Martin. I had been having the kind of week where everything was going right, and since I'm a relatively positive guy, I just felt like maybe, just once, God decided it was my time. Lord knows I had prayed enough, and they say you never know unless you ask. And tonight I figured it was time. Time I asked. It was late fall, Friday to be exact. I can remember the breeze being pleasant enough to ride with the windows cracked. I drove up to this fancy gated apartment complex. I entered the code that I was given. The gate opened. I said to myself, with any luck, tonight will be my last night doing this shit. I looked up into the rearview mirror, saw my soft brown complexion in the moonlight. My eyes looked tired. I needed rest. Between making drops and pickups for Dominic and taking care of my grandmother, I was spent. I parked in the deck, stepped out of the car. The soles of my shoes sounded against the cement until I was near the rear of the car. Just before I was about to open the trunk, I was approached by this green-eyed vixen named Angelique. She had this real milky complexion and strawberry red hair that always seemed to look like she walked through a wind vortex and was spit out unexpectedly. She stepped into my space and smiled. "Martine, what you got for me tonight, sugar?" She placed her hand on my thigh. Immediately, I reached for her hand and said, "Now, Miss Angie, you know it's not appropriate for me to do anything with our top client's woman." That is what I said. But honestly, I wouldn't have even if I was 4 sheets to the wind and hadn't seen a piece in 6 years. She wore a tight red top, which pushed her enormous breasts up like 2 mountain peaks. She stepped back, her face disappointed. "Well, if you're not going to give me any of that," she looked at my package, "then surely you have something else that can make me happy." She smiled, revealing specks of lipstick on her teeth. I knew exactly what she wanted, and honestly, I never felt good about giving her or anyone drugs. But one time, I refused her, and Dominic nearly handed me my balls in a bag because that chick made a big fuss with her man, Dominic's #1 client, who gave plenty of referrals. I slipped my hand into my pocket of the dress pants that I wore, pulled out a little bag with tiny pills. She smiled and held out her hand. I placed them on her peach-colored palm. "Thank you, sugar," she said as she strutted off. I shook my head as I watched her pop the pills before she was even out of my line of sight. With the keys in my right hand, I pressed the button. The truck opened. I looked down at the black gym bags. Opened one. Stacks of $100 bills, and none of it belonged to me. This would be my final job. My final requirement to pay Dominic back all the money he loaned me. I carried one bag on each shoulder and then one in hand. I would say it was heavy, but I was used to putting in work at the gym, so it didn't feel like much. But I gotta tell you, I wouldn't want to do it twice in one night. When I arrived at Unit 504, the door opened immediately. He knew I was there. He had expected my arrival and had probably had his people watching as I walked down the corridor. Carl, a big old country-looking dude with a head like a bulldog, and he looked like he could crush somebody without even trying. He stood at the entrance. He held his hand out. "I'll take those." I nodded and gave him the bags. For a moment he stood in front of me, like he expected me to leave, but I needed to talk to Dominic. Well, until next, I was hoping to talk to Dominic for a moment. He hesitated. It's late, man. I nodded. I know, but it'll only take a second, I replied. He sighed, but he obliged me. He stepped away out of the living room, and I closed the door. When he returned, he motioned with his big melon head for me to head to the den. As I began my walk toward the den, I could hear moans and groans. I thought, oh, hell no. I know he ain't in there. And when I entered, sure enough, there he was, with some chick's face in his crotch and his hand on her head. If you're busy, I can just... He tapped her head. She stopped, stood, turned to face me. She was tight. He always had a bad chick or two around. I was just never privileged enough to witness one polish him off. Latina, cocoa brown skin, tiny waist, thick everywhere else. This is my friend Hannah. Awkwardly, I waved. She uttered in Spanish, "Está guapo," which later I found out, he's handsome. He smacked her on the butt. Yeah, but I'm the boss. He takes orders from me. Ya vete. She didn't seem fazed by his behavior, simply walked by me and grinned. He stood up, adjusted himself. He wore silk pajamas, the bottoms, the robe top without a shirt. You have been doing a great job, Martine. He poured himself a drink of brown liquor. He tossed it back and continued. Keep this up. You could work your way up to my number 2 guy. My face went sour. I didn't even want the position I had. I certainly had no ambitions to be his number 2 guy. Nah, man, I'm sure Ricky enjoys being the number 2 guy. I wouldn't want to take his spot. For a moment, he stared at me, sort of confused. Then he burst into laughter. He said in Spanish, "Estás bromeando? You're too funny." But I wasn't laughing. I was uneasy. I was worn. I was done. And I wanted out. I was actually thinking, since I finally paid you back all the money, this, was never supposed to be a long-term thing for me. He walked over to a table which he designed like a chessboard. He sat and studied the pieces. "Do you play?" he asked. I shook my head. He nodded. "My dad taught me when I was a kid. We played all the time." "Hijo," he translated. That's son. There is so much about life you can learn by playing the game of chess. You have to get into your opponent's mind and be able to see his plan of attack before he hits you with any surprises. He looked at me. I saw this day. I knew it would come, but I didn't think it would come so fast. It's only been 8 months and you're tired of our friendship already? Of course not. I mean, I value our friendship. We can still shoot hoops. I can shape you up every week, You're one of the best dudes, man. Clean with it, so unsuspecting, all Wall Street Business Weekly looking mofo. He joked and we shared a laugh. He was right. I did have that look. Tall, well-groomed, always dressed to impress. People don't usually walk away from this, Martine. He pressed the button under the table, and suddenly 2 of his muscle guys, led by Ricky, entered the room. I jumped. I threw my hands up in a boxer stance. I knew I'd get my ass straight whipped, but I wasn't going out without leaving some kind of damage on one of them. Dominic laughed. Calm down, Martine. Volviste loco? By now, my breaths were all over the place. And Ricky, his number 2 guy, this medium-sized Cuban dude who was always cool with me, he had a big, huge grin on his face. Relax, Martine, everything is okay, he commented as he walked over to Dominic, who was now near the bar. Sorry, I thought you guys were about to, I replied. I looked at Carl and Steve, who were all just cracking up. You really thought you could beat all three of us? Asked Carl. I laughed. No, but I'm sure about to give it a try. Now that's what I call spirit, said Steve. The button-down shirt he wore looked like it was going to shred into pieces if he flexed. Dominic reached for a bottle of Hennessy, 5 glasses, and poured into each. That's why I like you, Martine. Believe it or not, you're like a little brother to me. Thanks, I said. I was somewhat confused because we were cool, but I had no idea he saw me like a little brother. I mean, I really didn't know much about him except that he was from the Dominican Republic, that he grew up in New Orleans, and then he moved back to DR for a few years before moving to North Carolina. He invited us to the bar for a drink. We each picked up a glass. One more, he said as he eyed me, my face a question mark. He repeated and added, one more job and you're free. And I highly encourage you to say yes. I'll even give you $5,000 to sweeten the deal. What else could I say? I nodded. He lifted his glass, and we all followed suit. Salute. The glasses touched, and the clink sounded in the room.